Hawaiian Studies. Today we're here to listen to our cousins, the Maori and Aboriginal Maoris from Aotearoa and Aboriginals from Australia on their presentation of Kaitiakitanga and Traditional Custodians, Ancestral Guardianship of Heritage Resources in Aotearoa and Australia. This event is co-sponsored by Kamakakūokalani Center for Hawaiian Studies, Huliauapaʻa, and the Gladys Brandt. We'll be introducing our panelists.
Aloha nui kākou, o wā o Kelley le hua ke o puna Uyeoka, no kailua o ahu mai au. And I have the honor of being able to introduce our Kaitiaki, our Kia'i, from across Moana Nui a Kea, Moana Nui a Kiwa. I was fortunate enough to meet them last year at an indigenous hui in Aotearoa, actually where I call home right now, and so inspired by this group of people and what they do in their own homeland for their lahui, for their communities. And we worked really hard over the past few months to try to get them here so they could inspire and share just some of the similar challenges and issues that they're going through in their homelands in Australia and Aotearoa with us, and which we noticed right off the bat when we had our kōreros, our talks together, was that we are going through a lot of the same challenges, but pulling together and learning from one another, uplifting one another is our way forward. And I'm very honored to welcome you all here today to Hawaii. Yay, you made it, and all of our hard work, and you are here. So I'm just gonna read off their bios quickly. Matua Des Kahotea belongs to 3 tauranga iwi of Ngāti Pukenga, Naiterangi, and Ngāti Pukena. He completed an MA in archaeology in 1983 at Auckland University, which was followed by a 2-year internship with the Smithsonian Institute, which included 9 months at the Bishop Museum in 1985. He came back to Tauranga in the late 1980s and became involved with the Tauranga Iwi Treaty of Waitangi confiscated land claims until 2001. With the introduction of the Resource Management Act in 1991, he became involved professionally with both the RMA and Historic Places Act as a consultant archaeologist and Maori heritage specialist. He undertook his PhD study at Waikato University in a topic of historical anthropology, followed by postdoc research relating to Maori heritage. Aloha. Dr. Gerard O'Regan, Naitahu, has a background in museums and Maori heritage management, including a decade on the Maori Heritage Council of the New Zealand Historic Places Trust. He has previously been heritage manager for his iwi and centrally involved in their rock art heritage endeavors. He is currently a research fellow at the University of Auckland's James Henare Māori Research Center and is undertaking a Royal Society of New Zealand Marsden's Fund research project on the North Island Māori rock art. Welcome. Amber Aranui is of Nai Kahunungu, Ngāti Tuwharetoa, Ngāti Tahinga, and Ngāi Tahu descent, and is dedicated to working with iwi Māori as well as other indigenous peoples throughout the world. She gained a Bachelor's of Arts in Anthropology and Religious Studies from Victoria University and a Master's of Arts in Archaeology from the University of Auckland. She has recently completed a PhD with Victoria University focusing on Māori perspectives on repatriation. She currently serves as a repatriation researcher, Karanga Aotearoa Repatriation Program for the Museum of New Zealand Te Papa Tangarewa, Aotearoa, New Zealand. Aloha. Makere Rika-Heke is a senior porahi at Poehere Taonga Heritage New Zealand with a background in history, ancient history, traditional material culture, and archaeology. Her respective tribal affiliations are Waikato Tainui, Ngāpuhi, Te Rarawa, and PKW in Taranaki. Aloha. Brian Warner is a descendant of Kabi Kabi and Waka Waka tribes on his mother's side and Barumgam on his father's side. Brian has worked alongside various Kabi Kabi leaders over the last 4 years, participating in many cultural heritage negotiations in regards to land use activities to reduce, avoid, or minimize harm to Kabi Kabi traditional cultural heritage. Brian also utilizes his skills as a former recruitment officer to build and harness support from various organizations to assist the Kabi Kabi in developing an Indigenous Ranger program, where his people can draw upon their knowledge and connection to protect and manage land, river, and sea countries across the Kabi Kabi estate. Welcome, Brian. Matua George Falvall is a tohunga, or expert in the cultural heritage field in Aotearoa, with over 60 years experience, and has been actively striving to help protect and preserve Ngāti Teata heritage through active consultation. Edith Tuhimata has experience in cultural heritage, a BA in honors in archaeology, and is currently the resource consent Kaitiaki for Ngāti Teata. Rika-Heke is the Ngāti Teata Tumu Whakare. He has over 30 years experience in dealing with tikanga and has been instrumental in the establishment of Kohangareo, Kura Kaupapa, and Wakaama. Johnny Friedland, Ngāti Teata's Kai Hautu Waka, has over 30 years in working with an Auckland Council and other government agencies. He is currently working towards helping our people negate processes. Aloha nui kākou. So now we'll call up our first speaker for this afternoon, Makere.
Aroha mai. Te toko toko I whenuku, te toko toko I wheroku, toki atu kia, ko te mumu, ko te awha, ko te manihi kai o tata kiri pana pana, ka re I runga, ka rau I raro, ka whaita more, ka whaita more, tēnā ko te pau. Kukiri. Aroha mai. I'm extremely nervous, and I'm standing up here with zero sleep over the last 3 days, and I do apologise. I hope that I'm coherent, but I do apologise for the state that I'm in. I'm extremely nervous. I didn't expect to be first. I'm usually not the first, I'm usually the last, but hioi, please bear with me. So basically, I'm here to talk about Kaitiakitanga. I'm here to talk about Kaitiakitanga in terms of reframing the question, because what I'm interested in back home is talking about how we perceive Kaitiakitanga, or the act of guardianship, how we protect our sites, how we interact with different connections, different sites, and different people. So I'm quite interested in flipping the question on its head and looking at it from that perspective. I'm going to provide the broad overview and the broad brush for everybody that's going to come next and talk about how they're working in Aotearoa across the board in different disciplines, and how they exercise their kaitiakitanga or their kaitiaki responsibilities. So throughout our motu, we've got a different mix of confederations and tribal clans and iwi hapu. In terms of Kaitiakitanga and how we term Kaitiaki, there are different dialectal differences that we have to explain these types of people. In one dialect, we have Kaitiakitanga, Kaitiakitaka, we have Pautiakitanga, where I'm from, Pautaki, Pautataki, we have Whakatupuranga, Pautairanga here, and Tiaki Tuturu. So those are some of the roles and titles that different kaitiaki assume across the motu, and the different ways they exercise their mana and carry out their mahi. And each of these persons here, each of these kaitiaki that you see here today and that you'll listen to, actually occupy different roles, different spaces, and practice kaitiakitanga differently. There are different perspectives on how our people are having the discussion in Aotearoa. So we are moving beyond a discussion of what is traditionally thought of as a kaitiaki. And I wanted to look at different perspectives on how different authorities in the country have commented on what a kaitiaki is, what their function is, and how they approach kaitiakitanga. So Charles Royal, in surmising how he thinks about kaitiakitanga, he says that kaitiakitanga means guardianship and protection. It's a way of managing taonga based on the Māori worldview. Another perspective that is quite common that you will find us having if you're ever privy to any one of our hui or come into one of our wānanga sessions is this concept that Marsden puts forward, is that kaitiakitanga is a concept that applies to traditional Māori guardianship over resources. Guardians are keepers, preservers, conservators, foster parents, and protectors. You have an institution's view on what a kaitiaki is, which is simple. Guardians are known as kaitiaki, so guardianship, custodianship, stewardship. That is how the kōrero pans out in a museum sector. And we'll have a panel member that will go through some of these aspects in the papers to come. You have Whina Te Whiu, who's from Tamatea, from Motiti, up in the far north, who says and comments in some of her papers and her kōrero that kaitiakitanga is the rightful exercise of mana. And last of all, we have the legal perspective, which is we exist in an era where tribal mana has been supplanted by legal ownership and statutory regulation. Te ture Pākehā. So a foreign body of law, LAW, versus our understanding, LORE. In terms of the most common views of kaitiakitanga, this is the most simple way that I could put it. For us, kaitiakitanga is a philosophy. It's a philosophy that's deeply embedded and rooted in te ao Māori. It's a set of holistic principles. It's a way of being. It's a way of connection. So connections between people, between places, between our environment, and those sorts of interconnections and relationships, what we call whakapapa or genealogy. It's recognising the fact that there is a spiritual element to kaitiaki, to being a guardian, to being a protector, to recognising that we are part of the natural order as kaitiaki, but also recognising the fact that kaitiaki are not always human. So we have that element where we bring in kaitiaki who are taniwha, for example. We have people from Ngāti Tiata here. Rua Kaiwhare is one of the kaitiaki. So recognising that fact that people, spaces, and entities often exist in this in-between space of how we conceive of protectors. There's also rights, roles, and responsibilities, obligations that we have, compulsions that we have. So in my area, in the Pōha, we have the same, from the cradle to the grave. You are born to a birthright, you have an obligation to fulfill your birthright and to perpetuate the cycle. You have an obligation and a compulsion to protect, to serve, to sustain, to shelter, and to be the po or the sentry that stands in a certain place to ensure that you protect and guard what has been passed down from our tupuna, from our ancestors. It's also about management. If we're getting real in terms of having the conversation in Aotearoa, it's also about who has a say or a mandate over resource use. It's mutual benefit, it's allocation, it's distribution. It's also about nurturing. How do we nurture kaitiaki, but how do we also nurture all those things that are part of the natural order and the cycle? This is a diagram that just threw together to try and explain 3 different sets of kaitiaki. And it's just really broad, and it's just broken into what I'm calling tiaki tangata. So you've got ahika, which are hunga tiaki, or those who stay home and keep the fires lit and burning. So those at the coal face that are keeping those fires alive, that are going into bat. Those who are actively out on the land, on the whenua, who know where their places are, that interact on a daily basis. Then you have others who are technically taurahiri, those people from different areas that are operating in another area. And there are some kaitiaki who technically fit that bill, who aren't here today, but will be here across this symposium or this conference that technically fit that bill. So we have a broad cross-section of different types of guardians here today, and that will be here during this week. So basically, in terms of kaitiakitanga, that whole ethos, that whole principle, that whole perspective and worldview is actually provided for under our treaty. So for those of you aware, in 1840, we had a treaty with the colonial government. It's got different articles on it. Take you straight there, Articles 1 and 2, that enshrine the tenets of kaitiakitanga. From that, we get these different kinds of principles that drop out of that affect other pieces of legislation. And I just want to draw your attention to bicultural partnership, active protection, self-determination, and mutual benefit, because those are the constant themes that are going to be coming up throughout this kōrero and throughout the other papers that will be presented, or the panel member sessions. So not that I'm going to go over it. Key pieces of legislation. This is where Kaitiakitanga is provided for under the legislation, and this is the challenge that our people have or face on a daily basis, whether they're in institutions or at the coalface. They have to grapple with these principles and how they play out in another setting, a foreign setting. So when I started out preparing this paper, I had a lot more questions than answers. I'm the type of person that likes to ask questions and flip things on its head, because I like the kōrero that drops out. So in putting this together, this is actually a flow-on conversation that we had 2 weeks ago in Gisborne, when a series of kaitiaki, different types of kaitiaki, got together to discuss different aspects. I want to have the discussion, and a lot of my other peer cohorts in Aotearoa are starting to have that discussion about who are kaitiaki. It seems like a no-brainer, but who are kaitiaki in 2019? Because kaitiaki today are vastly different to what they once were. How is Kaitiakitanga expressed? How do you see it? What are the qualities that make a good kaitiaki? This is Pua Waikens. She works in the museology sector in museums. She's also interested in social research, and all these guys know her. She's a wonderful woman, but she represents a certain kind of formalized, formally trained kaitiaki. I had about 16 questions. But I also want to ask the question, or pose it, is Kaitiakitanga a collective responsibility? Is it all our responsibility? Is it an indigenous responsibility? Is tikanga and whakapapa a default setting? Who's responsible? If others who exist outside of the norms don't place the same emphasis on our role as kaitiaki, what happens then? And you see a lot of it at home. Disconnection, loss of identity. For some, you can actually see the psychological break in the way they interact. So, is it repairable is another question. Are we actively growing diversity? In the old days, everyone had a role. Men, women, different ages, certain bloodlines. We're not, in my opinion, we're not growing the diversity that we need. We're growing too much of one, and we're not growing living repositories of a certain kind. These are 4 different types of kaitiaki that you wouldn't, some of them wouldn't fit the old definition, and some of them do. The kuia on the left-hand side is Matakino Lolos. She's a wonderful woman who's adept at traditional arts. She's a weaver. She makes beautiful, refined, beautiful garments, beautiful taonga and kete. The young woman on the right is Kararaina Te Ira. She's been trained by tohunga, who would technically fit the bill of tohunga, but she's also been trained as a conservator. She's urban, she's Māori, and she's young. Then you have Jim Schuster and his wife Kathy, down in the bottom picture. Kathy is Ngāti Pākehā, she's non-Māori. But it was decided in Jim's family, and Jim's a tohunga, she gave birth to the next generation of kaitiaki, therefore she was deemed qualified to learn what no one else does. No. So she helps Jim. She learned from her, from Jim's elders and his mother. And then you have our cousins from Rangiriri, and you have 3 young men, relatively young men, that are at the coalface. And Rangiriri is a famous site at home. But they represent the face of not only the descendants of kings and the resistance in our country, but those who are keeping the ahika alive in a traditional way and capacity. So Kaitiakitanga reframed. Now, this won't fit the definition that you'll find others having a kōrero about in Aotearoa, and it differs slightly. And this is because it's informed by a personal sort of overview of what I've seen and what I've experienced. It's a calling. For some, it's a birthright, because we do have families that were born to it. My family were born to take care of koiwi, or our bones. They were also born to do certain things that others don't, or others won't. It's also a privilege in some manner. It's a role that some people find themselves called to because they're Johnny on the spot. It's often thankless. It's exacting because it has a life force or a motive of its own. It's dangerous, conflicted at times, lonely. And you'll see every one of us at some point in time have felt that. It can be invigorating. You can find solitude and peace on wāhi. It can strengthen or destroy because it is alive. And I've seen it work, and I've felt it work. And it's subjective. Depends on circumstance, context, and place. Now, I did want to have the opportunity at a time when I won't suck up so much time, but to pose a question to the panel, and if they can think about it, and if we have time to come back to it, I'd like to ask the panel to think about what compels them to do what they do. Where did that begin? What was the genesis of that? For each and every one of you who's looking on and sitting here, it started somewhere. So where was that? And I think it'd be good to just quickly canvass from each of our people when we have Q&A time, just where that was, just very, very briefly, because it's good to get a broad cross-section, because just in discussing amongst ourselves, we all have different reasons why we do what we do, whether it's service, it's calling, privilege, or kaupapa. So these are some of the things that each of the panel members here will revisit in a different form, and they'll drill down to the nuts and bolts. But what I want to say to our panel members is kia kaha, and I think everyone will find it interesting to see what your personal journeys have been and what your stories are, and for us to hear and learn from you guys as to where you guys are at, where you're going, what your aspirations are, and what your kaitiaki looked like in 2019. Kia ora rā, aroha mai, I'm going to pass the mic because I think I've spoken for too long.
Kia ora tātou, tūtahi mihi ki a koutou, te Huliauapaʻa mō koutou manaki whakaaro ana ka puta mai Aotearoa ki wāngenui a koutou. Nā reira, kia ora tātou. I was sort of talking about an issue a lot of us who deal with the same in Hawaii is only 6% of Aotearoa is whenua Māori. So Pākehā people, white people, own the rest. And that's really our issue and our struggle. The other thing is that I'm an archaeologist, and the archaeological record was first protected under the archaeological provisions of the Historic Places Trust in 1975. Those who you know, Roger Green, he was a key person in promoting that. And then protection for Māori cultural values only popped up in the Resource Management Act 1991. Prior to that, there was no protection for any cultural Māori values. So anything that was important. So we have a long history, seen a lot of destruction. I've got a lot of slides, so I'll have to whip through them. So what I'm talking about is maunga, and it's about management, how we manage. So I'll just go through this very quickly. Yeah. So 19th century British annexation, I sort of talk colonisation, that today we have to renegotiate and contest Western concepts of property rights, values and knowledge systems in order to maintain the Māori, our role and integrity of maunga with contemporary Māori belief systems. So I'll look at the role of maunga to symbolise mana of ali'i, iwi, that's tribe, hapu, sub-tribe, and personal identity. And the desecration of maunga by infrastructure demands with quarries and communication towers on private and Māori land, And I got an example of Māori landowners' economic agenda overriding the mana and tapu of maunga. So this is a map I put. I've got a Google site, and it's got, so every iwi tribe and hapu affiliate to a maunga in their landscape, which range in size from a small hill to we've got Gerald O'Regan, Aoraki, which is a huge maunga mountain. So they are all iconic landscape features symbolically representing the mana, power of the living descent groups and their ancestors, and all are held sacred. You'll see Gerard will give something as the opposite of the rock art, the numbers. So Maunga Mountains were revered iconic landscape features. So when Pākehā first set foot, because they like to climb places, go places, so they become very aware right at the early 1840s about how important Maunga were to a lot of people. And they, so there's, I've got some examples there. And that's in the Waipounamu. And then you can see the variation of sizes. And then the tapu of many maunga relates to the burial of ancestors. So there's a number of maunga which important ancestors were buried. And this is an example of maunga pohatu, and actually through the Māori Land Court, the burial ground was partitioned, but a lot aren't. And then very early on, the clash, Diefenbach was prevented in 1840 from attempting to climb Tongariro. Te Hehu is the ariki of Tūwharetoa placed the tapu on Tongariro because the previous Pākehā had made a ascent, because Tongariro was really tapu and even the locals wouldn't walk up it. But, you know, the exploring white person, no problem. And then in the 1850s, the establishment of the Kingitanga during the 1850s, a sovereign leader was sought to unify the tribes to resist and counter English colonisation. The fighting chiefs and the men who were approached, the mana was symbolised by their identity with the maunga. So you had ko taupiri te maunga, ko potatau te tangata, mauao te maunga, ko tupai te tangata, ko mate onga, tōku maunga, ko whanganui tōku moana. He's from Whanganui. And then Te Kania Takerau, he refused the kinship by saying his maunga hukurangi never travelled, and it's been handed down by ancestors. So, and a lot of people, these what we call pepeha, and they still use these pepeha. So today, maunga signifies the identity and mana of maunga. So it's gone from important ancestors or leaders to the tribe. So these are examples: taupiri te waka, tainu te waka, taupiri te maunga, mauao te maunga, tauranga moana, nai te rangi te iwi, and yeah. So those are some of the examples. And then the hapu, a sub-tribe, and a lot of areas are hapu. So you have a tribe will have a maunga, and then a local hapu will have their own maunga. And then I got all the stuff from the web. And then personal identity. So when we say who we are, we say our maunga, our mountain, and our river, or our awa or moana, which is ocean or harbour. And then in the Iwi Treaty of Waitangi Settlements for Inclusion, so a lot of maunga, because it's so important, where it was been Crown-owned and Crown has involved in management, so a lot of iwi sort of negotiate to have either get it back or co-management is a popular term. And then some of them is statutory acknowledgements. So this is more an RMA feature. And this is Ngāti Haua in the Waikato. And then an interesting thing is that with colonising set up with the English, they set up what they call public reserves, and then where they've acquired land which has a maunga, that's been a mechanism for protection. So this is Kareoi on the west coast of Tainui, Waikato. and it's just a background. I was interested in about how do we manage threats. And then this shows maunga in the Waikato Bay of Plenty area, and in the red circles are the ones that are reserved, so they're basically protected. All the rest are Māori or private ownership. And then, so a key part of the threat to maunga is private land ownership, land alienation and private land ownership. Because as you know, people in former colonial settlers, they like to express their property ownership. And this gives you an idea. The red is remaining whenua Māori, or Māori land. And then just the recent I was involved with last year, desecration of maunga, got the Wera Ichi on the range, and it's got a quarry on it. And then last year was a court case. They wanted a resource consent to extend it. It's just going through council hearings. So you had the bush clearance began in the 1890s, and then the quarry started in the 1850s, well before the Resource Management Act and stuff like that. You just battle it. And then another thing too, this is from it's on the boundary between the Waikato and the area I come from, and then the ancestors to where they came from. So the locals there, Ngāti Tangata, they symbolise it as ancestry. She's up there, she came from Tauranga, and she's looking back. So that was their, how they see it. And then another one, I think I did the first cultural impact assessment. That's a popular term in Aotearoa. Back in '85, I just left Honolulu, turned up, got grabbed by Tamaichi. They were fighting the Tūhoe Trust Board, so economic opportunity agenda. They wanted to cut the native bush and the shrubs down to plantation plant. But it was a maunga to the local hapu. So just the brown outline is the one. And then, so this was opposed by the Mahurehure Hapu or Ruatoki, who stopped the contract, so I applied the maunga. And then they invited me, and my career went backwards after that. I conducted a site survey with Mahurehure and cultural assessment. It was fantastic because I combined culture and archaeology together. So the cultural aspect, they saw the native bush as a kākahu, as a cloak, and then there was an area what they call, I mapped this all out, that's the archaeology. Wahirongo is for medicine plants, was a triangle of 3 big trees. You can see the proximity of the 5 marae of Tūhoe there. Wahi Tupuna, and one of them is their famous fighting in the early 19th century, Te Pūrewa. And he fought for Tūhoe, the Urewera, right throughout the area, and his power and his symbol of being a fighting chief, he lived in an open klanga, open fortress. It wasn't fortified, because nobody would attack him, but he went around elsewhere. And then they said, they showed me the ridge, and then they put the bulldozer through, and then they said, this is where the Pūrewa lived. And then, so I went to look at there, I saw the outline of Kumara pits and Hangi pits. I said, yeah, you're right. So that's, and then this is back where I come from. So we got 3 whales, maunga that are whales, and then the Public Works Act was sort of targeted for quarrying, for infrastructure. So you can see what it looked like originally, and then that's a start in the 1950s. The people objected, but you couldn't do nothing. Yeah, Public Works, you just took it. And then in the 70s, the council, there's a male, a female, and the baby whale, hukuragi. And the council and then the council council staff in the 90s says, they sold the rock. The owners didn't see anything. And then another one just right behind where I live, Kopukairo, that's the male whale. So you had land taken for communication towers, But when I showed you Wera-iti, there's a communication tower right on the top, and I noticed, I just looked at it last year, that the land wasn't taken compulsory. They took it compulsory off Māori, but the Pākehā property owner would have had the smarts to negotiate to keep the ownership, and you pay the rent. But I thought we're looking for the future that we might need that. We won't need that stuff, be all satellite or whatever. And then the property owner decided to build on top. What had happened, a property owner subdivided and got the resource consent. The house is supposed to be down the bottom by the road, but this property owner went and built a house up there. It got burnt in the story. And then you can see the house 2001 and the land taken. So to deal with that, so what I did is that under the Historic Places Act, they made it a wahi tapu, and so I did an outline, a 60-metre contour, and that's, we say it's a potai, it's a hat. And under the RMA, it slows the process. But most of the property owners now know they can't build a house up there. So, and then with this kupu kauru, there was immediate reaction. The Prime Minister, Helen Clark, had to respond to the property owners. They organised themselves. That's the sort of process that happens. And then that's my marae, and I live on there, and with kupu kauru. So it says, kupu kauru at the maunga, waitao te awa, rangatawa te tāhuna, ko Ngāti Pūkenga te iwi, ko whetu te rangi te wharenui. That's the name of the wharenui. Kia ora tātou.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ngā mihi nui kia koutou I tēnei rā. Ki ngā tangata whenua o tēnei motu, ngā mihi nui kia koutou. Ko Aranui a hau, ko te pauranga haurau taki kōiwi, taku mahi, ki te papatongarewa. Good afternoon, everybody. It's great to be here. I've been here for a week now, so I'm acclimatising nicely. So I'd just like to share with you a little bit about repatriation in Aotearoa. I'm sure you're all familiar with the work here in Hawaii. So I just sort of wanted to share with you probably some of the similarities that we share. So how do I change this a bit like that? Okay. So before I begin, I just want to share with you some of the terms I'll use. You're probably familiar with many of them. But just in case you get a little bit lost. So these are the terms that I'll be using. So the ones I guess to be aware of more is tupuna, so as ancestor kōiwi tangata, that's what we refer to as the bones of our ancestors or skeletal remains. Toemoko, it's a relatively new concept for an old word meaning moko mokai or moka mokai, and those are the preserved heads of our ancestors. Wāhi tapu, you're familiar with. Iwi, hapu, sub-tribe, whānau, family, and whenua is land. So, in order to understand why Māori and many other Indigenous peoples around the world feel so strongly about having their ancestors returned, it's vital to recognise that we have a strong relationship with our dead. For Māori, there are certain beliefs and values that are central elements to the continued connection, respect and care given to our ancestors. And these include, for instance, tikanga. So tikanga is defined as a set of beliefs associated with practices and procedures to be followed in conducting the affairs of groups or individuals. It's a way to act in the correct manner according to a specific situation. The other is tapu, and that's defined, and you will know what tapu means, as sacred or under spiritual restriction. The next is mana, and you all understand, so I'm not even going to bother explaining what that means. So for me, I see those three terms particularly as being important with regards to repatriation. And the other is whakapapa, and we all understand those connections that we have with our dead and with each other. But I also think it's important to recognise that our urupau, our cemeteries and other burial locations were not treated or viewed in the same way as many Western cemeteries, which are generally, I guess, maintained in some way and beautified. Some are even made into park-like spaces to be visited, and others are even part of a city's tourism. So I noticed that when I visited London, that a lot of the old cemeteries were places that they encourage people to visit and to sit and to play with your children and to take picnics. And I'm like, oh. So, so there are strong differences between the way that we view our own urupa, particularly our old ones. So for us, these places were secret. They were sacred places where the dead were placed to rest peacefully. These spaces were often hidden in either caves, crevices, or buried in unmarked graves so that they could not be desecrated by enemy tribes and later Europeans. These views continued well into the 20th century, and they were surrounded by the cultural values that I've noted up here. Regarding the repatriation movement, many groundbreaking changes have taken place. For us in Aotearoa, New Zealand, the journey of returning our ancestors back to their people has always been part of our culture, and therefore repatriation in this day and age is not a new process for us. In the past, when our people died in battle or during journeys away from home, it was important to bring back the dead wherever possible. In the case of battle, if it was not always possible to bring back the entire body, it was the head that was returned, so that the family could weep and mourn over them before laying them to rest. The repatriation of loved ones back to their haukainga or village, it still continues today, with the example of my own father, who lived in Wellington for over 30 years of his life. And when he passed away, he was taken back to the village of Pakipaki in Hawke's Bay, about 4 hours north of where I currently live. And he was buried with his parents and the rest of his whānau. And this is a tradition that still lives on in many parts of Aotearoa. So for us, it's expected. There was no question. New Zealand's involvement in the international repatriation movement really began with the international exhibition Te Māori. This exhibition showcased the fact that taonga were not separate from the people to whom they were associated. Māori were a living people, a living culture, a people still very much linked to their past. And acknowledging this connection was instrumental for the repatriation movement in Aotearoa, New Zealand. International repatriation began following the Te Māori exhibition, and one of the most powerful of those early returns was through the work of Ngāpuhi leader, the late Sir Graham Latimer. So Latimer took an active approach in preventing the sale of a toimoko from Bonham's auction house in London in 1988. And he took his grievance to the New Zealand High Court, and Latimer was granted legal guardianship over the tupuna, who later became known as tupuna Māori. Out of his own pocket, he negotiated for the return of tupuna Māori and travelled to England to uplift him. Tupuna Māori was returned to New Zealand and was laid to rest in Northland. Like Latimer, the late Sir Maui Pōmari was a prominent Māori leader, and also saw the importance of bringing our tupuna home. From the 1980s, his role as chair of the National Museum Council, and also during that time, he undertook a Winston Churchill Fellowship in England. He began to negotiate for the return of toimoko. He also set the precedent that human remains were not to be categorised as taonga or objects. During this time, he was involved in the return of over 30 tupuna back to Aotearoa. And it is through this work that he started, that in 2003, a formal international repatriation program was created, and that's the program I work for, Karanga Aotearoa. As active as we are internationally, or active as we were internationally during the 80s and 90s, we were just as active domestically within our own country. Following the establishment of the Waitangi Tribunal in 1975, New Zealand museums with strong relationships with Māori, with their local iwi, were proactive in returning all human remains held in their collections. Māori were also beginning to reclaim control over their cultural heritage, and this included their tupuna. Ngaitahu, the largest iwi in the South Island, developed its own koiwi tangata policy, which was the first of its kind developed in New Zealand, even before the government got involved. And museums soon followed suit from about the late 1990s. And these museums developed their own policies around the care and return of human remains. With the momentum increasing on tribal claims regarding the breaches of our Treaty of Waitangi from 1840, which is our New Zealand's founding document, iwi also began to include the return of the ancestors in their treaty claims, the most prominent being the return of over 60 tupuna back to Wairoba, which is located at the top of New Zealand's South Island. This claim and subsequent repatriation was a result of 4 generations of fighting to have those ancestors returned following their theft in the 1940s and 1950s. The museum's reluctance to return these ancestors was due to the site's potential significance as one of the earliest settlement sites from East Polynesia to Aotearoa. More recently, I've established the New Zealand Repatriation Network, which is made up of all of New Zealand's major museums, as well as some of our smaller institutions, who are open to undertaking collaborative research and returning tupuna back to iwi and hapu. So this is a major development in New Zealand's repatriation movement, and one which will only grow as New Zealand museums begin to proactively repatriate all human remains within their own collections. So the interesting thing is that in Aotearoa we have a government mandate, a government policy which supports the return of human remains or Māori and Moriori tupuna from overseas back to Aotearoa. But there's nothing within our own country which encourages or strongly, not forces because we can't force, but there's nothing within our own country which encourages repatriation. And I always found that a bit weird, so I'm trying to be proactive in getting that going. I'll just skip that one, sorry. I'd just like to show you an example of some of the impacts of repatriation back to iwi. So this is a short clip from a recent repatriation back to Waimarama, an area where I'm from. And yeah, it's in te reo Māori, but it has English subtitles, so it should be all right. So I'll just give you a bit of background. So this return was particularly important for the people of Waimarama because the collector himself, who was up there, Frederick Huth Meinertzhagen, was a big part of that community. And so for us it's bad enough that we have outsiders come in and take our tupuna away, but it's even more distressing when a person is welcomed in and made part of a community, that they go behind the backs of those people and steal their ancestors and taonga. So this is seen as ultimate disrespect, and I think if it had become known what Meinertzhagen was doing, I'd hate to think what might have happened to him. So Meinertzhagen even mentions in his letters that he needed to be careful that because he employed many Māori on his sheep farm and he could not afford to run counter to their prejudices. And he states, "You doubtless know how they respect the bones of their ancestors." So an interesting sort of side note, the largest single collection of taonga Māori or Māori objects in the British Museum come from Meinertzhagen. So a large number of those are from Waimarama, and so the iwi have a desire to repatriate those in the future. So I believe much has evolved over the last 200 or so years, from collectors and explorers seeing peoples from other lands as non-human, savage, or merely a curiosity to be obtained, studied and displayed. Today the tide has turned, with the descendants of those objects of curiosity, like myself, exploring the world, searching for their ancestors, righting the wrongs, reclaiming the past and closing the chapter on that part of our history. We know the actions of the past will never be forgotten, but I think in order to move forward, we must literally lay the past to rest. Kia ora.
Hello, my name's Brian Warner. I'm from the Cabra and Dalla clans of the Kabi Kabi Nations within South East Queensland. First off, I'd like to thank the Hawaiians and Kelley for inviting me here today. I feel very honoured, and to hear the chief and the Māori people at the opening. So, Kelley asked me to come along and speak a bit about what I do. So, about 2 years ago, I was approached by the Queen's Park Wildlife Service. They look after our national parks. I remember when they first did approach me, I said no. I walked away. What are you contacting me for? How'd you get my email address? Because I consider myself boutique, if there's a problem, then you seek me out. But yeah, so somehow they were seeking me out to get involved. So I didn't reply to emails. I waited for 2 months. So I spoke to my own traditional owner group. I said, look, what do you want to do here? And everyone said, we don't know what to do. So all of a sudden, I pick up the phone, I call the guy. He says, oh, can you come and see me? And so I went and seen him, and that initial introduction to each other was about he wanted to hand back our traditional artefacts. So it got me thinking. I always hear about what my people talk about, and about our Dreamtime stories, and about our national parks. And I was thinking, hey, this could be good to do a Kabi Kabi Ranger program within the national park. So, does this thing work? Or no. Oh. So these are in the green is the national parks within our boundaries within the Kabi Kabi country. So just in the top right corner where it says Great Barrier Reef Marine Parks, that is actually my ancestral area. So down here at Lake Aotearoa, I call that the heart of Noosa National Park, or Kulula Recreation Area. So this is, the Noosa River runs up there through the lake, and this is where the fresh water meets the salt water. So that's why I call it the heart. The coastline, or the coastal exterior, then you've got the interior. We've got a lot of different climates. So down on the bottom, you have your Melaleuca Heath paperbark area. It's very swampy. And then to the top right, it's a rainforest. So very different environments. There's a bit of a story about our coastal exterior. It talks about Marawa, and Marawa is this fair maiden, long black hair, beautiful Aboriginal lady. She used to clap her hands and sing to the rainbow, and it used to come and visit her. She was in love with the rainbow, see? And but there was this evil tribesman to the north. His name was Birawul, and Birawul wanted her, and so he ended up snatching her to claim for himself. So after many weeks, she was living in that environment, but she's, every female has enough of that. They've got to stand up, run away, right? So she started to run away, but Birawul had this spirited boomerang. It was bigger than some of the trees that were in the national park. So he threw the boomerang to try and bring her back. But when she screamed for help, the rainbow came down. And at that point in time, the rainbow put himself in front of the boomerang. And on our eastern extremity, on the coastal, it's rainbow. It looks like rainbow the sand, so we call it Rainbow Beach. All the coloured sands. So that's a bit of a Dreamtime story. So why do we want to get into the national parks? Yes, for access, cultural purposes, spiritual ceremonies, to visit sites, teaching young people, gathering resources, and fishing and hunting. Part of that is land management too. So in Australia, we had a theory of looking after our land, our cultural landscape. I don't know if you know, but there was a bushfire here recently, And I was talking to Kelley about it, and sometimes our country gets sick, we don't take care of it. So that's because, I don't know if there's environment that live today, there's a lot of greenies that says don't do that, don't do this. But you know what? Sometimes do something if it's right. Because our country's sick. And the reason why these bushfires get out of control, we don't manage them. And we need to manage them. We have what they call coal burning back in Australia. So we allow the coal burning to begin, but we manage it and we control the fire. And you've got to allow for certain wind direction. And yeah, so we go and space it out, and we allow this fire to burn, then put it out, and then come back to check if it's fully out, because sometimes the fire gets caught in the undergrowth. But yeah, I was talking to Kelley, and also that's about killing invasive weeds. So see how we're starting to get into the land management, be in the ranger space. Where are we next? I don't really, I do a PowerPoint and then I forget it. So participation management. So many Aboriginal people resent having to have a permit to visit national parks, especially where they have historical associations with land. So you mentioned that Dreamtime story I was telling you about. So I hate it. You know what? Why should they tell me to stay out of my own park? I should have rights, shouldn't I? So, and I also hear people complain about the current neglect or maintenance, so hence the fire management. Yeah, no, I really see, I might have been a recruitment officer, but before being a recruitment officer, I used to be an intelligence officer. So I never allow people to know my behaviours or how I think, because being an intelligence allows you to, change your game, never be the same. So when you go into negotiations with government officials, they pinpoint you, they think that's who you are. But you know what? I spent a lot of time researching about legislation, even about what rangers do. So when you're sitting there and they're going, oh no, we don't really want you to be here, change it up, throw it back in their face. This is what I know. And then you start throwing the legislation at them. Because we're cultural warriors, The game might have changed, but today, let's use a different process. So, how am I going for time? So involvement involve the appropriate people from the area, include involvement in the decision making, provide employment and land management, and be supported by funding and resources to establish organisation, infrastructure, information and communication strategies and training. This is really hard. This is really hard to implement because we are such a dispossessed and dispersed nation. Most of our people live outside our borders. We have a high demand, but our lack of supply. So I went and did something strange. I approached our local council. They're going through a zoning structure. And I approached this developer, and turns out he's bought this land and you can only build 6 houses on it. But the state government are going through a social welfare package. So I said, look, if I can speak to the local council and, we can build, if you build 60 houses, can we take 20? I said, because you'll earn more in revenue if we do it that way. So lo and behold, he turns around and goes, I like this. So then I approached the local council with the same idea. So at the moment, it's a bit of, they don't really want to give it to a land trust to manage on our behalf, but I've spoken to my people, what's their wishes? They said, we're about self-empowerment, aren't we? We'll manage those houses on our own. No one else is going to manage the houses that, because you've worked your butt off to get up to this point, we can do the rest. So we're out that in the game. Maintenance and protection, so land and culture are inseparable. So to us, that means the same thing. Cultural heritage includes maintenance and use of parks resources, as well as looking after special places and particular landscapes. And it is appropriate and efficient for Aboriginal people to be involved in an ongoing way in parks management decisions rather than being consulted in a piecemeal fashion only at the last minute. So part of that, I've negotiated with the Queen's Park Wildlife Service for some of our cultural heritage work to be conducted, and they fund that work. So we normally get about, for a week's work a month, we bring people over, they get put up in motels, so that's a way of bringing our people back on country to help protect their country. I'm going to leave it at that because you want me to present on Thursday, don't you? I'll keep going? Okay. Yeah. That's it. Thank you. Mechanism protocols. So establish of National Resource Management Organisation ensures that parks are communicating with the right people. We seek to have a joint management arrangement and to cement the agreement with parks, an MOU has been drafted to have joint management arrangement. So I end up sending the MOU, or the Memorandum of Understanding, to Kelley to have a look at. So that pretty much guarantees that we do our cultural heritage work within the national park. They take on some training proponents for us. Yeah, it's a pretty big deal. It's like a buy and sell. It's sort of like it's a trial run. That's pretty much how I wrote the MOU. If they don't like it, we can change it. But the thing is, it sticks. And then if both parties work to an agreed format, then it becomes an agreement that becomes legislated. So that's pretty much where I'm at with the national park. Yeah? Oh, 5 minutes? Oh, I'm almost finished. I was trying to rush, so. So here's some photos of of my country. So as you can see, there's Rainbow Beach there, in the left photo. That's where's that drop box come from? But yeah, there's the Noosa River. Yeah, it takes on different environments, different landscapes. And so there's a bushfire there. Looks like a nuclear bomb just gone off. In the middle there, at the top, is leading to our King Creek. Yeah, so as you can see, some beautiful places. Thank you.
E mihi kia koutou e te kauhaika, haukaika, koutou e mihi mai he karaka mai, tēnā rā koutou. Ko ora ki te mauka, ko waita ki te awa, ko tahupota ki te tangata. My mountain is Aoraki, my river is the Waitaki, my iwi is Ngaitahu. We're an amalgam of three iwi, Waitaha, Katimāmoe and Kaitahu, and is represented in the teko and the kururu of my whare tupuna, my ancestral house down in Bluff, the southernmost marae in Polynesia. One of the things Ngaitahu has is we have, oh, that's not going to work now. Aroha mai. I'm going to be talking about rock art and the Kaitiakitanga of our rock art in New Zealand. Very simply, there's 155 sites in the North Island that are currently known. There's about 655 sites in the South Island that we currently know of. And the point of it is, compared to museum collections and other taoka or treasures around, they represent thousands and thousands of images across our landscape. But very little is actually known of what the rock art is, or what it was traditionally seen to be. This is a painting done in 1876, and it's a complete fiction. There is no memory or knowledge of people sitting around in whānau and family groups painting rock art in our shelters. So because of that, because of the little traditional knowledge that's come down, the story of rock art in New Zealand so far tends to be dominated by the archaeologists. And they've come up with a whole lot of different arguments in the past that basically swing between ideas of whether they're doodles or whether they're done by tohunga, our priests. Whether they're done as a pleasurable pastime, and on the other hand, this idea that no art is ever casual. So it's been this backwards, forwards between sacred or not sacred. Truth of the matter is, our old people probably did rock art for a whole lot of different reasons in different times and different places. But then there's a question of how old it is. And one of the ideas is that it was something that Southern Māori developed on our own in the South Island. Nothing to do with the rest of Polynesia, nothing to do with the North Island. Another argument is that it was brought on the first waka as part of the kete, the basket of knowledge brought to the South Island, and it continued right through to the European times when we see writing happening in our rock art, as you have with your whakaaro or your rock art here. But in this absence of knowledge, it hasn't stopped us using it. We've been using it since the 1950s when it started to become more to the attention of iwi. And here you see this is called the kiwi chick because it looks like the chick of a kiwi in an egg. And it's been picked up and used in the rafter patterns of one of our meeting houses in Christchurch. It's an example of the multitude uses of one example of the multitude uses of our rock art. But it's not just us, everybody's had a good go at it. This is the famous Ōpahi Taniwha, probably the most famous Māori art image ever, partly because it got copied from the archaeological records. It was used in a whole lot of different artistic media, including being put on a postage stamp back in the 1967. The postage stamp itself then became a bit of Kiwiana, and so you start to get it being put on, the postage stamp being recycled and put onto, this is a Crownland plate, which is very collectible now in New Zealand. And from there, people have actually picked it up from the postage stamp and used it on other things, including tā moko, or tattooing anyhow. But in all this wanting to use the rock art and our reconnection with the rock art, how do we address this knowledge gap? And so one of our leading Ngaitahu archaeologists, Ethel Anderson, back in 1990, he and this Pākehā archaeologist down here, Brian Ellingham, they got together and they started a survey project. And their survey project showed up in a little pilot study area, showed up about a 200% increase in the number of sites and a 200% increase in the number of rock art figures in already recorded sites. So there's a huge increase. It built the argument for the justification of a bigger rock art survey in the South Island. And at that point I became involved, and we went to the Lotteries Grant Board and got some funding to do a 3-year project and employ Brian full-time to undertake this study. It was simply going around, refinding the sites and securing a photographic record before the sites disappeared. Most of our rock art's on limestone, which weathers. But at the same time we got the Electricity Corporation of New Zealand, which then got split up and it became Meridian Energy. Meridian Energy sponsored our rock art project, and about 20 years later they're still funding a full-time rock art curator position for us. So with that, we also got the Ngaitahu claim, our tribal claims settlement came through, and our tribe has actually had some of our own resources, and therefore what we've done is we've actually carried on this rock art survey over that, ever since the 1990 pilot. Just to give you, this is just a very quick snapshot, but to give you an idea, NZAA means the New Zealand Archaeological Record System, which is the officially recognised archaeology sites and list of archaeological sites in New Zealand. And in each of these survey areas, you can see the increase in the number of the additional sites that we've found through our SIMRAP survey. And you can see that we're just finding more. Every time we go and look, we find more. And that's been the objective of our project. But with that empowerment of the knowledge, we actually started, of where our rock art sites are, we start to get a new initiative coming through, which is, as part of our land claim settlement, we actually got the management of these 2 sites back. These are probably the 2 most publicly accessible and well-known sites in the South Island. We got them back to as tribal sites. And then, of course, one of the things we did is we put up some fencing and some pathways and that. We put up a bit of a palisade. The rock art sites never had palisades, but what we were doing there is showing them to be treasured places, to be appreciated places, compared to the farmland that they were otherwise. So now you don't get cowpop on them. We then got really excited and we built a rock art visitor centre. So the Rock Art Visitor Centre, Te Ana. Te Ana whakairo is our word for rock art, which means the adorned or the painted or the carved cave. And so we've called our rock art centre Te Ana. It's down in Timaru. It gets some visitors going through it, but one of the key things is from that visitor centre we now run education programs out to some of our rock art sites, and we also run tours out to some of to the Ōpahi Taniwha site, the one I showed you on the postage stamp, which we now, as a tribe, have the leasehold over that land. Our rock art has also started to be used, though, by some of our artists, including in their tāpoko, and wonderfully, it's been picked up and used by the fellow with the red scarf is Naitahu, his wife is Ngati Tūwhare Tō, and they've developed a play using these big flatso puppets on the rock art. Thousands of young New Zealanders in the last 2 years have been exposed to our rock art and our rock art stories through this play, this drama performance. So the key thing with the Ngaitahu rock art, one of the things about that is we've got this rock art trust, which is a tribally developed and implemented trust to manage and drive our rock art kaupapa. And the key ideas behind that are the ideas of self-determination. We now set the agenda for what's going on with our rock art heritage in the South Island. It's also given us a mechanism to grow and maintain some of our own people working on our rock art kaupapa, our rock art initiatives. But it's also underpinned by the up-to-date archaeological surveys, which are really important if we're going to be out there advocating for the rock art sites. Makere asked us before, what are one of the key things we feel about Kaitiakitanga? When we go back to a South Island rock art, we didn't know where a lot of it was, so how can we claim to be the Kaitiaki of it if we're not actually informed on where in the landscape it actually is and what its state is? One of the key things about Ngaitahu, though, is we've got 18 marae. 6 of them are the marae with most of the rock art. The 3 in the middle down there probably have about 80% or about 70% of New Zealand's rock art in their marae areas. It's different in the North Island. You've got multiple iwi, and not only multiple iwi tribal territories, but if you look at those black dots, the numbers on those black dots represent the number of marae in that area. So when you go back to 155 sites across the North Island and that many marae, it doesn't figure big in the head, rock art doesn't figure big in the head space of any particular one. Instead, they've got, as Des was talking about, they've got thousands of pa sites, heaps of fortifications, and those, they're visible from afar, they do demand the attention of the marae, of the iwi. So with rock art in the North Island, there's 1 or 2 localised projects, very few, this one here, the Tarawera with the red canoes, that has been registered as a wahitapu by the New Zealand Historic Places Trust. The Kaimaro canoe figures are covered in algae. And so there's only 4 cage sites in the whole of the North Island. So what that's done is I've got this project going at the moment that me and a bunch of people are working on, which is trying to develop a Māori archaeology of the North Island rock art. Its key idea is to do local projects with local people. Mick here holding up his little bit of paper. What he has found there is using 3D technology, we've been able to find some rock art figures that are there on the rock face that he's looking at that were previously lost. You can't see them very well in this photo as it turns out, but they're there. On the other side, we've got a bunch of people who have come together and to start to form this network to try to link up people across the North Island in terms of sharing and understanding, developing an island-wide understanding of rock art. And one of the interesting things to come out of it, for example, Jim Schuster down there is actually talking about the red canoes in his area. And the red canoes happen to be in an area where you've got a lot of lakes, and portages of canoes were quite significant. It's not to say the waka are on the red canoes are painted on the portages, but they're fitting within, that's part of the landscape context. So very quickly, I just want to race through what we've done. We've done a site record review. In 1981, there were 30 sites known in the North Island. You can see over the years it's been climbing. We now have, in the latest count, 155 sites, and that's before we've started going out into the field. And when we look at that, we can start to see some of the differences in the distributions. We can see open air sites are all over, but the rock art shelters are in the central North Island. Petroglyphs, rock carvings, are spread right across the North Island right from the top down to the south. But the paintings, the pigment paintings, like the kuru here and these waka, they are all located just in a little part of the central North Island, typically around the Taupo volcanic zone, which is from Lake Taupo and out to the Bay of Plenty. The bottom one here is from Tainui, and you could actually pick that, the bottom picture with it's got a waka and a little red tiki figure. You could pick that up and put it anywhere in the South Island and it would look absolutely fitting. So the idea that the North Island and South Island rock art are so different is not necessarily proven. An interesting thing is we've got these little red daubs, largely due to this fella here, this old Pākehā archaeologist Perry Fletcher, who started recording red daubs because previous people didn't record them too much, thinking they weren't that flash. And also not recognising them in the landscape. But the red daubs are centred again around the central North Island, whereas the kuru, these carvings, these spirals on rocks, you can see they're on both coasts and in the centre. So they're actually much more widespread than people previously thought of even just a couple of years ago. Whereas the waka tend to be a little bit more concentrated again in that area, in the lakes area of the Bay of Plenty. These are tiki human forms. You can see their distribution is widespread again. And the same with these carved faces. They're found right across the North Island. But feet, which you get in other Polynesian islands, the feet we've only got in 1 or 2 places. And animals which dominate the South Island, tiki figures and animals dominate the South Island, but over here in the North Island they're very rare. Writing, as with here, writing is found everywhere around. Wherever you find rock art, we also find our old people did writing as well. Where's this going? So what I want to get to is just one of the key things about our project and that Kaitiakitanga is trying to build awareness among people who matter. That's a statement from the Getty Institute. And when it was talked about at the Getty Institute, one of the ideas was, we need to be promoting it to philanthropists, to funders, to government agencies, to decision makers, as well as Indigenous people. But very much for us in New Zealand, we actually need to be working with the local people because it's the local kaitiaki who determine what are the next steps in terms of keeping this rock art, doing the research and the gathering of information on the rock art, but also that's where you get the intergenerational shift. You don't get that through the institutions. And if we do that, then we can start to look at our wider rock art connections across Polynesia, which would be really good fun to do. I'll just finish with e ho, kanui taku aroha atu, tēnā rā koutou katoa. That's actually written in the cave down at Ōpahi. Kia ora mai tātou.
Kia ora tātou. George Falvall tēnei from Kaitiakitanga iwi, or Manuka. That's in the Auckland area, Auckland district, Tamaki Makaurau. Today I'm going to talk about heritage, how it was and how we see it today. But I'll just start off with a bit of tikanga here. Tikanga, protocol and whakapapa, genealogy and the protection of the Maori life principle of our tonga and then the environment is very important to iwi Māori. Our cultural connections to land and sea, water, catchments are timeless physically, spiritually and emotionally. Even today, where Māori's land is passed into tauiwi, that's other people, we still have an abiding love for the land of our ancestors. It's still there. Kaitiakitanga, spiritual and physical guardianship, ensures harmony with the environment that has a process and intrusion to prevent imbalances of heritage and environmental damage. Kaitiakitanga is embedded in tanga and in turn embedded in mana atua, mana tangata. And so, so when we look at that photo there, Puketapu is our manga, Kaifari is our taniwha. He's our main guardian of the tribe, and Ngāti Tātaras, us we're the iwi. So we revere our taniwha, and doesn't matter if we fly the waterways or anywhere we go, we always make sure that we have a karakia and our taniwha is with us, especially when we are plying the waterways. Traditional whakapapa traces back to the beginning of existence, when a single entity separated and became Ranginui and Papatūnuku. Their children became the natural elements where man emerged from. And that's the tikanga of that part, and many were the children of Rangi and Papa. It's all part of nature. Thus, traditional whakapapa bonds us with the physical and the natural world, and Rangi Rawako Papa are the ones we believe in, and on a world and planetary scale. And as we walk the whenua, looking for our wahi tapu, that is always in our mind, always in our heart, that we're walking through nature of Rangi and Papa, at the starways of the waka and the whenua of our people. So this is what I'm talking about. Kaitiakitanga, the Maori, the life principle of plants, animal, insects, everything that lives and breathes, rocks even. The wairua, the spiritual wairua of things. And I'd just like to say that as Indigenous people, we have a special wairua that other people want and they will never get. And the ihi, the wehi, when you feel the things that are there on your waihi, you see things, you feel things, that's the ihi and the wehi that you feel. And of course the mana belongs to nature, the mana belongs to the people who look after nature. I will now go on to the reasons why it is so hard for Māori to look after the heritage. And I'm going to go into briefly speak to you on the Celtic Past of Aotearoa. In 1840, a treaty was signed between Māori and Pākehā that was not honoured, relating to land ownership. Tauiwi, the Crown, saw and wanted what Māori had. Māori became aggrieved and Pākehā ill at ease, which finally escalated into land wars between Māori and Pākehā that spanned a period of 27 years. 27 years of fighting, from 1845 to 1872, with losses on both sides. During this period, During the period 1863 Taui put in the Suppression of Rebellion Act, followed by the Settlements Act, as Maori were resisting the sale of land. A proclamation was made that triggered the commencement of forced confiscations of Maori land at Aotearoa for tauiwi settlement. The left photo on the left is, if you look at the photo, all the black area is confiscated land. The other areas, the Maori sold land also, there's also sold land, but the land was settled by settlers arriving from the mid-1850s on. So that's all that land was settled by tauiwi. And all the land is black, the confiscated land, that was also settled by tauiwi. And on the right there you can see where all the readouts are with the crossed swords, and all those readouts were straight opposite the trenches and the rifle pits of iwi Māori. That's what they are. So when we look at all that there, we end up with a lot of landless Māori. There's pages and pages and pages of hapu and iwi, landless. And so today, when we look at that, a lot of the land is in private ownership. It's in private ownership, and it's very hard for us to, as Māori, to, there are pockets of Māori land, there are maraes and all that sort of thing that are around, but it's made it very hard for us to take care of our wāhi, because a lot of it is on private property. And so back in 1989, Ngāti Tata Iwi realised that the growth would spread throughout the whole Tamaki region. The big question was what would happen to our wāhi tapu and the environment when growth headed our way. In 2003, our response was the formation of the Ngā Tohu Kaitiaki Trust Incorporated, mandated by our people to analyse council's process and how we were placed in that process. The Ngā Tohu Kaitiaki whānau said we're at the bottom of the list of the process regarding land use applications. Being the last on the list to be contacted and not included in the discussions at the beginning of the negotiations, we began applying the brakes. We put the brakes on. And soon the moans came. Those Maoris are holding up the works again. We had some of our people standing in front of bulldozers yelling at the driver to turn the key off, all that sort of thing. And there were many clashes with councils, and through us pushing hard, council changed their land use process. They were constantly confronted with the Treaty of Waitangi and section of the Resource Management Act. We threw that in their face every time. The outcome was Ngāti Tata landowner, council planner, surveyor, archaeologists were now on the same page on initial on-site negotiations before any work commenced. Sometimes you have to push hard, eh? But another thing that that helped us was the, I'm not pushing any buttons. On your left-hand side, we have two comatras and one of our ladies. They've just run a bulldozer through a PAR site. So all work was halted. We stopped all the machinery, turned all their keys off, and then on the right is the PAR site itself. The damage was just back this way, you can't see it. But that PAR now is about to be returned to Ngāti Chata and us in the Givers. So we're still negotiating with that take. So the visual, another thing that also changed their minds was a 250 PowerPoint slide presentations of waihi tapu just in our which opened their eyes because they didn't realise there were so many waihi around. So that was a key thing because they didn't know the amount of waihi in our area. It forced them to look at the heritage process, the heritage, and to make changes. And also, we also asked council for their tools, which was their GIS system on land use stuff, which they kindly downloaded on our computers. So we had all the up-to-date information, exactly the same as council, at our fingertips. And we were able to then work a lot better and quicker and process things a lot better and quicker. And also have a lot more say in things, which we still do today. Yeah. So that meant a lot of full engagement with council and the GIS data. Another thing was that's myself there on the left, and Dame Nanek Manhinak. Nanek was one of the main, probably one of New Zealand's, one of the main people in New Zealand to push hard on heritage and especially the environment. And here we are, we're talking about the Pukeruapaʻa that will be returned to Ngāti Chata soon. And an archaeologist, that's Vanessa, she's here, archaeologist in New Zealand now. And so that's coming back, that particular PAR. And these are just a few PARs, some of the PARs that we're on. And we've got a landowner there on the top left, and one of our own there, council. And we went up there today to talk about a covenant on the bush lot and also the PAR itself. And right there we have one of our own, Rita. She's looking at all the shell middens in a defensive ditch. Down below that I'm standing in a set of ruas, which we are at the present. We're working with Ports of Auckland on erecting tohu and all that sort of stuff, landmarks on that particular spot. And also on the left-hand side there is a huge rua or a pit which is on Puketapu. Puketapu I mentioned before as our main maunga. And I've been looking at all the maungas you've got around here. I think ours is only little compared to your fellas here. You've got huge maunga here. You must have a lot of names up there somewhere. But educating our youth and councils and the general public. On the left there, we have, our top left, we have 2 principals and all their head teachers there with one of our own, showing them and talking about one of our past sites. And the reason why they want to know this is they're looking at introducing it into the curriculum, into the curriculum. So that's a bonus. Bottom left there, we have our own rangatahi, our own young kuhangareo children out on site. This is a dig, an archaeological dig on one of our main past sites, Kurakapapa Māori, and here they are, all wondering what this is and what that is, sort of thing. So we're just showing them. And the archaeologists are there. And this is what happens, this is what we found there when we removed the topsoil. There were hanging stones everywhere, cooking stones, and those are just little, those are whares, house areas with drains. They had drains, drained everything up the side, down to up the banks. So it was the whole place was well drained. And this is some of our youth that we're training. They're standing one on the left, they're observing the very big ruas, pits and stuff like that. And we're talking about them and what they are, what they are for. Same as on the right there, that's a defensive earth defense, that they're up against. So we're just educating them on that sort of stuff. These are kids up the top left there. They think that 600 years ago a fire was lit with a match in a lighter. And here we are with the boys again down below. And these are school children. These are school children out on site, on the far side, educating the schools. We've got our kaiakas in the schools teaching our culture, and there's not many schools now in our area who can't sing a waiata, because they're very good. They're very good. So there is some good news. There's some good news, not all bad news. So to date, we have a good number of paths that are protected under covenants, some surveyed and pegged, survey pegged, tohu, landmarks and all that sort of thing. And this is one that went up recently on the far side. We did the blessing at night, and Ricky here, he did the krakia on this particular site. And so there's many more to go there on this particular area. Very well attended by both Māori, Pākehā and everyone, councillors, and our minister was there. So here's another one who was blessed on the same day. Yeah, there's a rock, carved rock. Here's another one we have in the township. Our township is called Waiuku, and the rangatira was the reason why it was called Waiuku. There's some more tohus here. So we're putting these things also with signage, covenants. Here we are. We're putting the signage around. mainly on beach areas. So it tells the story of that particular area. The next sign is further down the line that tells the story of that area. So we're just educating everyone about our culture, and about the stories of our culture. I'm not sure, I think it might be about time for me to stop, I think. But anyway, yeah, so and there's also conditional agreements also with the landowners, especially in our area where there's cattle. There's light animal grazing on farmland, no earthworks or dwellings on the site, and visits to the site on special occasions when we want to go there. And these are the arrangements we make with the landowners. And so I'm just hoping that this hui we're having here, if we can just give you just one value to help you with your heritage, and we learn just one value from you to help us with ours, then I think we will be happy. This hui will be successful. No reira. E tikanga maramatanga e tātua mamātu te rā paimārere.
Kia ora kia koutou katoa. Ka tautoko au nā mihi kua mihi i mua hau. I'd just like to support all the kōrero, all the speeches that have been made before me. My name is Edith Tuhimata. I'm the Resource Consent Officer for Ngāti Tiata. In the picture there are two of my kuia, Whaiananiko and Whaiawatara Black. They're my idols. Everything that they've done in the past has provided a foundation for Ngāti Tiata to go into the future. So I'm very thankful for my whaia and all those old people that have passed on, that have provided the opportunity for us in this day and age to be able to continue on their work. In our Ngāti Tiata policy statement, we have a declaration of how we feel and how we deal with our cultural heritage. And it comes down to the freedom of Indigenous peoples to manage their own affairs, to develop, base their own needs and value systems, to preserve their cultural identity, preserve their own cultural development, and to collectively and individually own and possess, manage their lands and resources in accordance with their own preferences. Our Kaitiaki approach to environmental management is holistic and provides for the following: restoration of damaged ecological systems, restoration of ecological harmony, ensuring that resources and their usefulness increase, reducing the risk to present and future generations, and providing for the needs of present and future generations. The third part of our policy statement for Ngāti Tiata is the restoration in the mana of the iwi, plan long-term usage of our gifts, our taonga, and to protect the sensitive features of the environment, plan for the provision of our kai for future generations. There's myself and our unit, our environmental unit. It's not all of us, but there's myself there, and there's Uncle George, our kaumatua, and there's my cousin Carl. He's an environmental planner. He's been there doing my job that I've got now for the last 20 years. I have a unique skill set because I'm a qualified archaeologist, but I was trained in both, trained by the old people and in a university setting as well. So this unique skill set I use now to be the Resource Consent Officer for Ngāti Tiata. From my own perspective, I have expertise in the cultural landscape. My job is to look after our taonga. And how I do that is by guarding the gates of development so that no undue development happens on the whenua of Ngāti Tiata, on the lands of Ngāti Tiata. When I look at our treasures, our own definition is a different definition than anybody else. Our cultural heritage has our own definition. Up the top there is one of our pa sites. It's Mātuku Te Rea, situated in Wiri in Auckland. It's the pa of our ancestors Te Ata Rehe, of which we took our name from, Ngāti Te Ata. In the middle picture is a typical coastal pa. I advocate all the time to look at the cultural landscape itself. As an archaeologist, or as archaeologists, there's been a tendency in the past to just look at the physical remnants that's on the land. But with a cultural landscape, the Kaitiaki are able to attach its story. The Kaitiaki are able to attach its genealogical ties to the land. A Kaitiaki is able to link its stories and the values that we have as an iwi all together. So when an archaeologist looks at a site, it's not just the physical remnants. I'd like to see us moving into the sort of future that joins everything together, like the physical remnants with the story, with the cultural significance and the historical significance. At the moment in New Zealand, you'll just get an archaeological report that has a paragraph in it that says archaeologists cannot determine what the cultural kōrero is and everything like that. I'm not asking the archaeologists to talk about our cultural landscape, but I want us all to work together, because once all that information is attached together, then all of us can make an informed decision about our cultural heritage. Up until this point in time, I don't believe that we make those informed decisions because we're not combining all that information together. So I'm a great advocate for talking about the cultural landscape and asking everybody to think about the bigger picture, which is the one in the middle, about looking at everything, because there's different parts of a pa like a house. You have a cooking area, you have a toilet area, you have a hallway to connect everything together. The last picture there is Maunga Kiakia, and you can see all the cultural features on it. It's a world-renowned pa site. You've heard U2 sing about One Tree Hill in the past, but it's Maunga Kiakia to us, not the One Tree Hill. And it has so much more significance and cultural significance that particular song didn't even talk about. So Des showed that other picture of Taupiri Maunga there. We're hard done by, really, because developments or highways and motorways and all the rest of it are still going on. They're the things that connect all the cities and everything together, so a lot of the time they're encroaching on our maunga to be able to put the roads in and everything like that. That's a landscape of Mātuku today on the bottom there, and I wanted to put that picture in because there's our maunga there, and to the right-hand side, there's an industrial business right there, and it's jammed right up against the foot of our maunga. In front of it, you'll see there's some buildings and everything there. That's the Wiri's Women Prison. On this particular site, everything is trying to encroach on it, but it's our job as Kaitiaki to make sure that no more development happens on this area because it's so sacred, and it belonged to our ancestors. And as a Kaitiaki, that's my job, to protect these areas. Everybody's talked on the legislation sort of thing. I use the legislation as a hook to enable us to tie into the process. So the Resource Management Act, Section 6E, F and G, it says that those that provide, or those that have powers, must provide for our relationship with our ancestral lands. Number 7 is they must take into account Kaitiakitanga in that mix. And number 8 must also include the treaty, the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi when we're dealing with our sacred sites. So that's the sort of thing when a developer comes to me and says, oh, I've got this development and everything, and we don't think it, we've looked at the database and everything, and there's no cultural heritage there. And then I'll look at it and I'll say, no, one of our kuia told me that there was an ancestral site there, so I hook into the Resource Management Act and I say, no, engage. We want to engage on this. We have a right to talk about what happened in the past and a right to be able to incorporate into the decision making as well. Section 92 is a handbrake mechanism. It's at council when a developer doesn't provide this the information they're supposed to, then we use the Section 92 to say, hey, they haven't included us into the process and everything like that, and they really need to. Section 88D is a mechanism to compile a cultural impact assessment, and I know that Des has talked about that. It's a report based on the impact on our cultural lands, and it enables us to put those stories into play. With intensification of development within our area, we're still having problems with capacity. There's not enough kaitiaki to go around. The rate of development is faster than we can educate our next generations as well. So these are, problems that we face as kaitiaki at the coalface of development. There's other mechanisms that I have in my kite or my toolbox that enable me to do my job, and that's our kaumātua and our kuia. Uncle George is an awesome example of being able to help us with our cultural advice, and we need to go back to our old people too and talk to them about everything that we're doing, because without them then we don't have that prior knowledge. Another mechanism that Ngāti Te Ata uses to record our cultural heritage stories is through the GIS database. An example is what you've seen with Uncle George in his presentations. It's informed by our kaumātua and our kuia, our kaitiaki and our haukainga. So our old people, the guardians and the people of the home all inform our database. This one here is a movie of Uncle and I out on the land talking about this particular area here, but I can't, if there's no sound then we can't hear what Uncle's actually saying about the landscape, so I'll just go to the next one. When we're talking about Kaitiakitanga on the land, the resource consents process is another mechanism that I use to continue to be a guardian on my ancestral lands even though I don't own it. When there's a proposed land use consent application for a subdivision, the first thing as a kaitiaki I do is I assess a map of where it is. I find out what they are proposing to do. Are there any known archaeological sites? Are there cultural sites? They're the same. I look on the New Zealand Archaeological Association database to see if there's any known cultural heritage there. The Chi inventory is the council inventory at Auckland Council. I have a look on there, see if there's anything in there. And then the last database that I check is our iwi database to see if there's any cultural features or anything within the cultural landscape. Then I ask myself questions. Is it near a waterway? Is it near a maunga? Is it coastal? How big is it? Is it on a headland or a promontory? Does it have a ridgeline? When this preliminary assessment goes through and it fits a number of our criteria, then I say, oh, we want to engage on this particular project. And then I do an assessment of the environmental effects. I ask questions and have a look at the proposed documentation which accompanies every resource consent. Then I walk the land physically to assess in order to formulate a response with the recommendations. It's not always guaranteed by process, but recommendations include, we'd like to have the recommendations included as a condition of the consent. There's another video of me walking the land. It's a video about how beautiful our ancestral lands are and how fortunate that I am to be able to do our mahi for our people. It's something that I love, it's something that I'm passionate about, and I'll keep doing it until I go to the other side, I'd say. That's what kaitiaki are. It's not just for the here and now, you end up being kaitiaki for your lifetime. One of the most powerful mechanisms, like Uncle George says, for change are our children and our great-grandchildren and the generations to come. If they know our stories, then they would tell our stories to the next generations and so on. So that's why telling our story is so important. even to future, they're going to be our future environmental planners, they're going to be the next anthropologists, they're going to be the next archaeologists, they're going to come through the colleges, the primaries, the kura kaupapa Māori. So it's important that we have teaching resources, even little things like the adoption of the beaches and maunga so that they can be kaitiaki for those areas as well. So if they learn to be kaitiaki at a young age, then we're gaining. There's also the waka-ama stuff, which is rowing our canoes. That's our connection to our waterways and everything like that. There's a whole kaitiaki kōrero around waka-ama and being out on the ocean. And it's even little things like the rubbish collection, getting our rangatahi and the next generations to pick up rubbish at the beaches and that, because that in turn makes sure that they have a relationship with the land. So the key mechanisms in my kaitiaki kite or my kaitiaki toolbox is my kaumātua and my kuia, my old people, because without them we wouldn't be here. Ngāti Te Ate has taken the lessons from the past and tried to incorporate it into a process for the here and the now. Educating our young people is important. Incorporating the cultural landscape in archaeology is really, really important. The RMA, like I talked about, those are the provisions that I use. It's important to talk to our parents because they're our teachers of the next generations as well. Our iwi database is important because it's more extensive than any other database in New Zealand. We have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of sites within Ngāti Te Ate, and that enables us to practice our kaitiakitanga. So our rangatahi are important to us because they're the next generation coming through. I've got a couple of young ladies that are coming through. One is in her last year at anthropology, and the other one is in her third year of environmental planning. If we really want to make a difference, we've got to be educated in both worlds. And the last one there is whanaungatanga, and it means the relationships that you make with people. I think with Ngāti Te Ate, the difference with us is that we've been able to make the relationships with the farmers and the landowners, and they in turn let us come onto the land and do our cultural stuff. And the whanaungatanga also comes into play when you're dealing with councils, when you're dealing with developers, when you're dealing with government-owned entities like Ports of Auckland that we have. All the relationship stuff is really, really important. So that's my job as a kaitaki, a resource consents officer. Thank you for listening. So kia ora kia koutou katoa. Ngā mihi.
Let's give another round of applause to the panelists. I just wanted to ask you folks to come up, and then we'll open it up for questions to the audience. Can the panelists come up and sit over here?
International perspective, when we are bringing tupuna home from overseas, initially we see them as our tupuna, like they are my tupuna. So it's my responsibility to help take them home. There are often times where we can't find out where they're from, and provenance is just North Island or Auckland, and that's really hard. So as much as possible, we've got to find out as much about those tupuna as possible. Where we have perhaps overlapping interests with a number of iwi, what we do is that we contact all iwi who have a connection to that whenua, and at the end of the day it's up to them to decide what happens. Usually it's the iwi that have mana whenua who reside there at the time, who take on that responsibility as kaitiaki to rebury and look after those tupuna. But usually in our experience they have included those other iwi who those tupuna may belong to, but they no longer reside in that area. So it can be very difficult. But for us, for our program, it's not for us to decide, it's for the iwi to decide. And sometimes if they can't decide, then the tupuna stay with us until such time as a decision is made.
Any other questions? Helena, did you have one? Terry, we'll go there. Sorry.
Here, when we have a construction site construction going on, and they come across bones, they have to stop. Yeah. And then there are two kind of agencies that are called the police department to determine, if there's some foul play, or the archaeologists to determine the age of the kupunas, or the ibi. Do you folks have similar regulations? Yeah. And the other question I had was for the kupuna who talked about the quarry construction development going on. What were they extracting? I know in Australia there was a movement against uranium mining, but in your case, what were you talking about? What were they extracting?
We actually have a law that most of it's human. We have a law that the police have to be contacted to establish whether it's whatever happens, and then and it's sort of addressed with the Heritage Act. Maybe the others, so there is a process, and generally it is stopped, and then now what is standard, which people have talked about, in getting a resource consent for development in areas where there's a highly likelihood of finding sites, archaeological sites or other type of sites. So local people, iwi, Kaitiaki, like Ngāti Taha, they have a protocol. So as soon as any few is found, they stop, and then they have a process where to go. I was involved years ago with elders in a particular area, and then they stopped from taking it away from development, because a lot of, from a cultural point of view, they're there for a purpose. So you taking them away, you're taking the mana away. So some people have hold to that. It just varies around the motu.
I just want to say, if you find koiwi, especially in our country anyway, New Zealand, you get an archaeologist, an expert on bone, who can identify the bones. Whether the bones might be European, Chinese or Māori, that archaeologist will know what it is, what nationality that person is. So the law is to get the police. But if you get an archaeologist out there who can identify the bones, and she's qualified to do that, and the police arrive, it's very likely that you'll be able to take those bones home. Otherwise, the police will take them away, and you're not sure when you will get them back. But that's the best thing to do, is get an archaeologist or a person who can identify those bones, and when the police arrive, they won't take them, because they'll be discuss it with the person, and then it's likely you will take them home. Kia ora.
Kia ora. I've rolled out a cultural monitoring process in the South Auckland area, and what I did is to be really proactive about things, because we have a discovery protocol and everything like that, but to me the discovery protocol is sometimes the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff. So what I've done is that within that resource consent process, I make sure that, if there's a high probability of finding any artefacts or any koiwi or anything that within a coastal area, because it's mostly the coastal areas, I get the developers to do a preliminary authority to modify and destroy, so that if they do come across something like that, the process is already in place to be able to facilitate that. In the a lot of the time there's an archaeological management plan as well. I say to them that the validity of the koiwi must be done on site by the project archaeologist in conjunction with the Kaitiaki, so that we have the power to, if it's validated that it's koiwi, we have the power to uplift if we want to and reinter back in our rohe. I include that as a condition in the archaeological management plan, because I've found that in the past the process just takes our koiwi away and sticks them, not necessarily in the museum, but they store them and then we don't get them back for a very, very long time. So the process, I also use that for artefacts as well, you know, because Uncle George is a collector. Give our artifacts back to us off-site so that they don't go into the garage of an archaeologist or somewhere else and don't come back to us. So that's part of our process there too.
Okay, Whaia, I'm going to just preface this by the fact, so where this is coming from, this kōrero, so just keep this in mind. So I work in a specific unit, it's called Te Tira, and I work as a pauarahi. So we stand as the sentries in a group, we're a unit of 14. We've all got different skills. I just happen to occupy quite a unique space where I'm also dealing with a lot of the cultural matters, but I'm also dealing with archaeology as a trained archaeologist. And I'm the one that goes out and does retrievals for koiwi. In our country, we have a 3-tier system. So in the event of the scenario that you explained, there's a framework, a national framework and a policy that's governed under the Heritage New Zealand Pauheretaonga Bill or Act of 2014. So under that, under the koiwi policy that we have is a national mandate, police need to be notified because they need to know whether or not it's a crime scene. Once they've established that, then it goes through another process. Process is that iwi are contacted because there's actually a consultation mandate. But there's also another framework that allows interaction between our agency, which deals with domestic retrieval in that scenario that you described. And so it flows on from that. Cultural monitoring is actually governed under another system called the Resource Management Act. So there's a whole other set of provisions that govern that space. So the other hat that I wear is for my confederations that we're talking about, and where Ngāti Te Ata are in, I was trained as one of the tribe's adjudicators and first commissioners. So on different levels, I'm usually the one that interfaces and deals with those situations when koiwi come up. For my area, particularly in the Puaha and in Waikato, I'm also called by the cops. I'm the one that does the retrievals. I go and select places. I go and interface with iwi and then help them through the framework. I also help them at the other end when there's a dispute over who may take custody of these koiwi. So that's the system. We have a few other systems, but essentially need to establish if it's a crime scene, need to discuss with iwi who needs to be consulted, and then you need to know which process is being governed by which. And then you need to know where you sit in terms of our act and our policy. I've been to retrievals that are from 1 or 2 burials to 200 to 500. I'm usually the one that's always there, and if there's a dispute over an archaeologist, particularly because there's a whole tikanga around that, so we have usually in my area, between 1 and 3 days. The regulatory process is between 3 to 2 months. So I'm usually the one that's called to help them do things quickly, to oversee it, take the minimum informations, and then deal with the cops and deal with my organisation and with the Crown to ensure that Kaitiaki achieve an outcome that they can live with, that they're not harmed by.
Mahalo for your presentations. This is open for any of you who'd want to respond, but I'm curious if you could talk about your experiences working with your non-Māori counterparts in archaeology and cultural resource management and museums, and what is that relationship like in Aotearoa?
Putting people on the spot. Anybody?
I talked to Taiaraka. I just come back from actually the internship with the bishop, and then I went. Roger Green was my professor in my masters, and then I saw him one day, and he blasted me about being involved with the Mahuruhure, and then I just didn't respond. Because basically he said, well, I didn't train you to be a political activist. And then I didn't respond because I'm a Māori and I have a job to do. But I'm the only archaeologist that's taken the Historic Places Trust to the Environment Court. Because the process, archaeology is protecting the archaeological record. It's not about, for us, the most important thing is the physical entity to remain. And archaeologists place low values on what they call shell midden, low values on sites that have been highly disturbed. But for us, whatever's left, it's there. The mana, the ihi, the wehi is still there. So I have no problem, with conflict with archaeological colleagues. I'm on the, I'm on the perimeter with them, but to me is my role is for my community and my responsibility. And now I'm a elder with it, so that's my job. That's how I look at it.
I think for me it's a bit of frustration because when I walked into my position, walked into a legacy. So we've pretty much had the one archaeologist for the last 20 years. And I was going, what the hell's going on here? Why haven't we changed this up? Every archaeologist has a different science, So we're at that stage where I've got to go back to the group and say, come on, bring another archaeologist, show their assessments. See, they do good work. That's the stage I'm at with my group. So yeah, I'm not liking where we're at, but we're getting there. So thank you.
Kia ora. I've worked in museums and in archaeology, and in terms of archaeology, I've had wonderful Pākehā colleagues, people who have wonderful Pākehā archaeological mentors, people who have helped me through with my studies and my learning, and the same in the museum sector. One of the things when we look at the museum sector now in New Zealand, most Māori issues are managed by Māori. And that's something that happened in my lifetime, because when I was 20, working in the National Museum, there were 6 Māori working across all of the museums in New Zealand, and we were all trainees, apart from one, who was a curator. So there's been a huge ground shift there, and what I do acknowledge is that that ground shift was actually helped through, not only by our kaumātua of the day, but also by a lot of Pākehā colleagues of the day. So it's it's a varied history. At the same time, I've also had a Pākehā colleague, I remember this one day, being after a heated management meeting, been told I had to make up a decision about whether I was a Māori or a museum worker. I thought it was interesting that I couldn't be both, but hey aha. It was, and it's one of the, but those are actually relatively rare. What's a fascinating phenomena for me is when you work with different archaeologists, Pākehā archaeologists, I've hardly ever found one who I can't agree with on some level or whatever. But for some reason, if you when all of the archaeological fraternity comes together, there's a school of thought that starts to emerge that is a bit more at loggerheads where iwi thinking is at or where Māori thinking is at. So it's not down to the individual, it's almost, and I think that's one of the things that, well, from my experience, I've got to keep taking that step back and sort of thinking about the school of thought, the broader archaeological agenda that's in play within the system and that kind of a thing, rather than the individuals. Yeah. Tokene whakaaro. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Working at Coalface Development, I work with many archaeologists right across the board. We have our preferred archaeologists, those that think more around the cultural landscape than just the archaeology itself. So whenever a developer says to us, do you have a preferred archaeologist? We do have preferred archaeologists, and we facilitate trying to get the best outcomes like that. Kia ora.
I can be quite talkative when I get going, and I can also be quite combative. Basically, in our fraternity, I'm known as being quite a bitch on the scene, and that's just being real. I come from a combative line, but you know, needs must. No, say what you want. Say what you want. I can stand by myself. I've had lots of different kinds of experiences, from being a student, being spat on, being told I should go home, being told that I shouldn't work in this space, but I've also been told that by my own people. Sometimes we rip each other to shreds. You grow from it. You harden up. You keep going because you're serving a purpose. You're there for a purpose and a calling. One of the things that I do struggle with is that a lot of our Pākehā colleagues think that we're there to be cookie cutter, that we're there to be churned out like every other archaeologist. For me, I was born to do what I'm supposed to do. Our tribe, our confederation, actively grows certain people to be the tool and to be the mechanism themselves, to embody that, to be the tool that they can use against the system. So I was born part way into that and part way into interest. So I always struggled with that at university, because I wasn't cookie cutter and I wasn't putting up with the bullshit, and I was going to do my own thing. They never learn that fact, that you're there to study them, you're there to study their ways and to study the discipline to see how you can change it, use it, or make it better, or refine it and make it work for iwi hapu. The other thing that I've had in terms of the fraternity, unlike some of the people sitting up here who won't, I know they won't say it, but they've been actively blacklisted by what I call the greybeards, or the gatekeepers. We call them gatekeepers. They actively go out of their way to restrict Māori who are visibly Māori and who go out there and don't take the bullshit. And if you're at the cold face, you get a lot of the bullshit. The other thing that I do struggle with is dealing with colleagues who are well-meaning but can be clueless in terms of tikanga. So in terms of our ways of doing things, our ways of reading the signs in the landscape, of reading the wahitapu or the taonga, our significant places or the mauri of a specific taonga, given the fact that we believe that our taonga and our wāhi are alive, they're sentient and they're active. I have been on the receiving end, and this is what you can't account for. You can't account for your tauiwi and Pākehā colleagues' behaviour, but you're the one that often gets targeted for the association. So it's almost as if you were at that other end, so that's something that you need to account for, because there are numerous times where I've interacted with colleagues who haven't thought a thing about keeping koiwi underneath their desk, but haven't realised that may not be how they operate, and they don't feel like they're going to wear that, you know, the consequences of that, but it's come for their, and I work in a team where in my office we have 3 po. It's come for us. But they don't understand those wairua things, they don't conceive of it that way, and they just brush it off. You know, same thing on sites, no accounting for it.
Oh, good. Yes, I think you said it all. Yep.
Okay, unless there's any other burning last questions, anybody? I'll close it up. Oh, we have a burning last one.
I just want to do a round robin, go back to the question that I posed, 2 actually, but I only want them to be brief, and this is addressed to the panel so you get a good cross-section of where our thinking's at. 2 questions. One is, can non-Māori be Kaitiaki? And the other is, what made you get into archaeology or mahi huakanga? What made you take this path? And I'm going last, by the way.
The first question, I don't know. I'm going to leave it at that. The jury's still out on that for me. The second question, what made me get into this mahi? So prior to being part of the repatriation program at Te Papa, I was an archaeologist. And And, you know, for me, I got into that mahi because I had enough of reading about who I was and where I came from people who had never ever been to my country. And so I decided then at university that I wanted to find out about who I was and where I came from myself. I didn't want to read a report or a book about it. I wanted to see it for my own eyes and make my own decisions about what I wanted to do. And so that's how I got into archaeology. And I think getting into being a kaitiaki of our tupuna, on reflection, I think I had always been building up to this mahi. At the time, I didn't realise it, but, you know, sort of sitting back and thinking, how did I get here? And the different various degrees, you know, I'm a master's in archaeology, but I don't really do archaeology now. And yeah, for me, instead of taking tupuna out of the ground, now I help put them back, so.
When it comes to whether a non-iwi person can become a kaitiaki, we don't really do that in Ngāti Te Ata, but we do have kaiawhina, or people that help us to achieve our goals overall. So I'll just leave that at that. Where my love for archaeology, I think, started with my grandparents. Amber put a slide up there earlier on in her kōrero about Sir Graham Latimer. That was my grandfather. When I was a young girl, he brought the moko mokai back into our house and stuck it in the lounge before they were going back to the whānau to reinter it. And that was a sort of the first time that I felt the hair go up on the back of my neck. And he said to me, "Girl, are you staying? Where are you going, girl?" Because I had my bag and I was going. And he said to me, "Where are you going, girl?" I was like, "I'm not staying in the house with them people, you know." But on that, it got me thinking about everything. You know, well, if we don't go and get our people, and we aren't responsible to our people, do we really want to give it to someone else to do? So that's where my thinking about archaeology came in. And I'd rather that we, our Māori people, went out and looked after our own people as opposed to somebody else. And my grandparents really wanted me to be an accountant, but I didn't really want to be a bean counter, or rather do, you know, our cultural heritage. So that's where my journey started there.
Kia ora koutou. I tripped over a job in the National Museum when I was 19. And the National Museum was a funny little backwater of New Zealand society, which was very uncool to be at. And, but I realised there was a bit of an opportunity in there to do some really interesting things. And with that opportunity, with that privilege, came a whole lot of other responsibilities once you start working with the taonga and the treasures. And both in the museums, in the rock art and in archaeology, on one hand, I've always found it to be incredibly enriching, personally enriching, but on the other hand, with every bit of enrichment comes another lot of responsibility and obligation. And the two sides of the same coin, they're part and parcel of the same. And so that's sort of how I got into being working in this sector and continuing in this sector. Can non-Māori be kaitiaki? I think some of the stuff that's been said is, in the presentations highlights it for me, which is kaitiaki, our responsibilities as kaitiaki comes back to our whakapapa to our places and our ability to go and look after those places in the way that our old people want us to, or would be happy for us to, albeit with new technologies, new ideas. That being said, I'm also always conscious of something one of my aunties in Bluff said when we were having a talk about Kaitiakitanga on the marae, and she says, all these bloody people running around calling themselves kaitiaki. The kaitiaki is the ruru on the post, the little mōpok, the little native owl, sitting on the post watching you. That's the kaitiaki, or the taniwha, they're the kaitiaki of those places in her mind. And that's also something I sort of try to keep in mind, is sort of like, were workers. Yeah, he whakaaro.
The first question, I often get amused. Yeah, they're so energetic, like the non-Indigenous people. I really love it. But it's when you go, because my mum always says, never knock anyone. You never know when you're going to get any help. So I think, pay my mother fair due. But it's sort of like when you go, stop, that's enough now. That belongs to us. That's when I get the frustration. That's when it kicks in. So, yeah, it has a yes and no. For the second question, I didn't want to get involved in this. I was living my life, I was having fun. We were traveling the world. Then one day, my eldest brother said, you talk for our family. So you have to understand my clan group, there's 6 families. So in my family, my brother's the eldest, and above him there's all these elders. He just said, you speak for all our family now, for the one family. I said, what? What do you mean? I'm the 4th child. You're the eldest. He goes, no, you talk for all of us. And then the other 6 families come to my house one day and said, you talk for all of us. What? I'm like 50th in line or whatever. And I said, look, if you want me to do this, ask my wife. And because I'm giving up a lot here to come back to help you guys, And so they've asked my wife, they got my wife's blessing, so here I am.
I think the question was, can a Pākehā become a Kaitiaki? We have an archaeologist, he's a Pākehā. And he was out with Evie one time alongside a major river. And this old kuia said to him, can you see that thing in the water? And he looked down. And for the first time, all the training that he had done as an archaeologist, and he thought he knew quite a lot about our Māori things, all went down the drain. And he said it changed his whole life. So that's a Pākehā. He even got, they even lost his job virtually. He was a council archaeologist, and he attended a court case. And instead of defending the council, he was virtually defending Māori. So he lost his job. So it all depends on the person and his association with Māori. So it's one of those, he's probably the only one I know who would probably be a Kaitiaki for Māori, but the only one, no one else, but there's that one person. Because he's got the Māori feeling now. He's seen what Māori says. And so, yeah, good question.
And the question how I became an archaeologist, I actually started in my early 20s as a carver. I did Whanenui meeting houses, and I got interested in material culture, so I used to go to museums, look at stuff. And I thought, I tried for a job in a museum and didn't get a look in, so I said, I'll go to university. So I went to Auckland University, and then someone said, go and see Harry Allen, and he was an archaeologist, and then next thing I was enrolled in archaeology. But especially the field, I like the field work, the excavation, but site surveying, there with ancestors. You're digging, and as a carver, I used to scrape and create ancestors, and then excavating, you're creating the past of those ancestors. So I got into that. The issue was working with the colleagues, but I say it took me years to be able to address a lot of the issues, and then they've never been able to understand, sort of how I challenged them. And really, when I challenged them, I was looking after myself, because you exposed to a whole lot of things, and then So, and I used to be younger, I used to be really aware, and I would never go to another iwi area. Pākehās, they can go anywhere in the country, get jobs, and I only go to a place if I have blood there. And one place, I went to see a grand aunt who married into another region, and I didn't know. She said, oh yeah, you can go up there. This is to Taiarahia. That's how I ended up there, because I went to see her. And she said, oh, her younger sister is buried there. And then her younger sister was my grandfather's, my mother's father's younger sister. And then, so I knew is that ko ia hei kaitiaki, hei tiaki ahau e takataka hea ta whenua, means her spirit will look after me. Kia ora.
Short answer to the first question, because I deal with a lot of iwi in my bracket, and we have a lot of iwi in Te Aka Māui, and a lot of cultural overlays. In short answer, yes. And you will see people that are here, that are from other rohe, like Gina, who's actually from Tūwharetoa, working up in the top of our North Island as their kaitiaki. You will see, you will hear about in one of her presentations, another kaitiaki who's actually a Pākehā woman who acts as the kaitiaki. Basically, they get adopted as mokai or kaitiaki, or they'll be given another title, which means something very, very similar, but it's a capacity issue. In my neck of the woods, if iwi hapu don't, or the clans or the tribes don't have that capacity to fulfill that spot, then they adopt a mokai. Ianula is one. There are several that are operating up from where I am in Te Ika Māui. Fiona Mackenzie's one. There's numerous of them operating in different spheres. To the second question, and this is a bit of a hard one, but I'll try and short circuit that one. So I'm a bit of a weirdo. I'm the whānau weirdo. I was conceived at Te Rerenga Wairua, which is where we say in my father's people, where the dead go. I am born to bloodlines that serve not the light, but Hinenui Te Pō. So where my father's from, we say it's where Maui met his death. It's where he went to go interface with Papatuanuku to achieve mortality, and where he came a cropper, essentially. So that is in Whangaroa, in Pupuke. I'm from Te Hāwai on that side, I'm a Heke on that side. One of the reasons why I don't like introducing myself through mihi is because it can get quite complex. It also opens me up to attack. On my mother's side, I was born to a bloodline that deals specifically and is allowed within our tribe to deal with the dead. So taupiri maunga, my family have been fearing the dead since day dot. And we can do that because my great-great-grandfathers, two of them on my mother's side, are the sons of our first king. So when I'm talking about these things, I was baptised under traditional tohi when I was 3 days old. I went missing from my mother when I was born for 3 days. My grandmother took me. I've been on site since I was 5 years old with my grandparents. I've been throughout our rohe, up and down our rohe. Miria Ruha Ruha Hohai is my grandmother's name on one side. I'm also a Whiunui descendant, and I'm also a descendant of Rewa and Hongi. So my whakapapa allows me a certain leeway. I got into archaeology when I was very young. I've been advising on policy since I was since I was in high school. Some of it I did in the early years for Ngāti Tiata. I was at university at field school when I was 17. So this is not new. I came out with my master's when I was 21. I had my 21st on the same day. Uncle George is my uncle. And I'm not saying this, we have this saying, i te kaikumarireka. I'm not saying it because I want people to know who I am, but it places things in context as to why I do what I do, why I've got a big mouth. I got into it because I had a lot of rage from seeing my nanny in my koro. So, rangiriri pā, image that was flicked up, I referenced it, taupiri maunga. When the motorways, the highways, the railways were put through for development, our koiwi were the ones that were destroyed and were thrown away like they were garbage. So, my nanny and koro never had, for those particular burial plots, their babies, my great-great-grandfather, they never had places where they could go and tangi. So my nan used to cry up and down the railway where taupiri maunga is. We have others that are near the top, but her babies and her father were lying in that section. So we're talking about early 1900s and then 1960s. It's been an ongoing thing. So I didn't like this very much as a kid, and I'm a bit of a little pissed off kid when I get going. So that is where my compulsion came from. And if you read anything that I've ever put out, I will reference this because I don't really care. People need to know these are the real world consequences. But one of the things why I ask these questions and pose them is I want people to think outside the square. Think about where this is going in 2019. Think about aspirations and think about diversity. There is a whole range of responses to situations and challenges that our people must face. They make the best decisions they can at the time, depending on the kaitiaki, but it's their mana to exercise. There are those who want to preserve, there are those who want to utilise, there are those who just plain don't care, there are those who have given up. Every permutation and variation you can think of, it's there. You just have to have a broad spectrum approach and see it, and see the pattern that's occurring. And that's what I see. I quite often have differing views, but as you've seen, kaitiaki up and down our motu, up and down Aotearoa, both our motus, Haumea, it's different. Our responses are different. I just wanted not only the panel to see that, but everyone here to see that. It's a response. We're in reactive mode, but how does that change in 2019 and from here on in? Those are some of the things that my generation are now starting to think of and where we're heading. And we don't always do or exercise our kaitiaki as one would expect. Non-convention is actually the way my generation are going, but we're trying not to forget those who are still trying to preserve a traditional way. We're trying to merge, fusion.
Mawaira.